On today's episode of Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers, we're talking to a youth worker who started out in the local church and then watched as God grew his ministry from one church to an entire city. This is the Youth Worker Daily. Hey everybody, welcome back to Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers, a podcast from the Youth Worker Daily. And it's here at the Youth Worker Daily where we hope to encourage youth workers just like you, with tools, tips, resources, and helps so that you thrive at your ministry. My name is Jay Hyam and I'm your host, and Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers is a podcast for the everyday youth worker, featuring stories and testimony of what God has been doing in the lives and the ministry of the everyday youth worker. I want to invite you to go ahead and subscribe. We are now on iTunes as well as Podbean. You can follow along and subscribe with the podcast, and we would love to have you do that to grow our audience here a little bit. But we also ask that you rate us because it's when you rate us and leave comments, it helps this podcast to reach other youth workers, and that is what we hope to do, to be a resource and a source of encouragement to youth workers. And we would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few minutes and share the podcast out there on your social media platforms and let them know who we are, what we're doing. We'd love to share the stories of what God is doing with youth workers in their ministries with other youth workers. Hey, and if you want to be a guest, it's really easy. We are looking to start planning for season 2. We're going to be wrapping up season 1 here shortly, but we want to start lining up some guests for season 2. And to be a guest, all you have to do is just reach out, and you can direct message us, you can shoot us an email, you can visit our website at theyouthworkerdaily.com, and you can reach out to us through there. We would love to set up a Zoom call with you and get you to be a guest on the podcast, share your story, and all of the things that God is doing in your ministry. Well, today's episode, we have a friend of mine, Micah Marshall. Micah has a really cool story in that he was called into ministry. He started serving the church, and all of a sudden, God just gave him a heart and a vision for a ministry that has grown beyond just one church, but has begun to impact an entire city. I think you're going to really enjoy today's podcast. Before we jump into the conversation, Micah is the executive director of the Refuge Youth Network in Altoona, PA. And I want to encourage you really to listen to the entire podcast, because as Micah tells his story, he has some great insight and wisdom and experience. If you have a heart to reach your community, if you want to kind of reach out to those students that are on the fringes, Micah's story is going to be a great story to encourage you. So be sure that you follow us all the way through to the end of today's podcast. So without any further ado, let's jump into this. It was a great conversation. Super glad Micah was here, and I hope this encourages you. But let's do this. This is my conversation with Micah Marshall. So guys, I am here today with Micah Marshall, and kind of crossed paths with Michael actually through his dad, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in just a few minutes here. And then just recently, our paths crossed in person at a winter retreat, and so we'll talk about that in just a second as well. But Micah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Really excited to have you and hear your story. One of the fun things about this podcast is it is a podcast for youth workers, about youth workers, and so it's just an opportunity to share your story, what God's doing in your ministry and with your students, and hopefully be an encouragement or a place to find great ideas and some hope for other youth workers who are listening. So super glad you're here. Thanks so much for taking time. But Micah, why don't you start with just telling us a little bit about
who you are, where you grew up,
Yeah.
maybe what called you or how you felt called into ministry, where you went to school, and maybe those first couple years in ministry.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Jay, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's always a privilege to be able to talk with other youth leaders and other guys that have been in it a long time. And I know you're a seasoned vet, and so we honor you for the time that you put in. I'm going into my 11th year of full-time youth ministry, 10 years here, which has been pretty cool. But I am originally from the great city of Pittsburgh, which I absolutely love. Yeah, man, it's where I was from. I grew up there. My parents were pastors, and that's actually how you met my dad. Was through that relationship of my dad when he was at New Day Assembly of God and pastoring there. And so, I grew up in it. I was your typical pastor's kid, like started out really good, but then kind of went like far left field, man, like went and really had to discover this relationship with Jesus on my own. The one thing I love about my parents so much is that they never forced faith on me. They never forced a relationship with Jesus. They were always supportive person finding the call of God, finding a relationship with Jesus on my own terms. And so they navigated my crazy teenage years. And I went through multiple youth pastors. And that's kind of like a little background into why I am so committed to long-term youth ministry rather than short-term youth ministry. I cycled through many youth pastors. And so that was very difficult to not have that stability of someone that you knew was supposed to be stable in your life. But, managed it, got through it, went to a Bible college in North Carolina. But still my heart was not right yet. And I actually got booted from that Bible college and it got kicked out after 2 years. They basically said, "We appreciate that you were here, but please don't come back." And it was like, "Are you kicking me out, or is that what's going on?" And so that's ended up what happening. But then I ended up graduating from Zion Bible College. It's now called North Point. It's up in Haverhill, Massachusetts. At that time, it was located in Rhode Island. And I graduated there. And after that, what I did is I went and did a year internship in London, Kentucky, with a church called Grace Fellowship. And it was so far out of my comfort zone that anything I could ever imagine. Dude, I had a neighbor that walked a chicken like you walk a dog. Like he had a string on a chicken, he'd walk it around. Like they had the Kentucky Fried Chicken Festival in town. Awesome. KFC started the next town over. It was a culture shock. Going from someone awesome. who like, dude, it was wild, man. Like I've never seen a town shut down to celebrate chicken, and they did. Like it was crazy. But I was there for a year, and when I went in, I went in with the full intent of just being the intern of the church, getting my feet wet in multiple avenues of ministries, kind of figuring out from there what I want. But when I landed there, within like 2 weeks, like, "Oh, by the way, you're just going to head up the youth." It was like, okay. And I fell in love, man. And at that time, I was able to learn and grow. It was a very, like, I was such a rookie as a youth intern, but I learned that was my passion, and I learned that's what I wanted. So I was there for about a year under the internship, and we saw the youth ministry grow from just about 30 to 40 to over 100. And what was interesting, man, is I was connecting with kids that were like, potheads, smoking, playing basketball or hanging out at the store, like kids that normally wouldn't fit in church. I had a draw to that, and they had a draw to me. And so there was something special about that. But the church, like, they liked it, but they didn't really like it because they were old school. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so I was engaged at that time as well to my wife, Bethany, who's from Virginia originally. We met after college, and we were doing long distance. And basically it was like, "Babe, if we're going to get married, I'm not going to live in Kentucky. Like, that's not where I want to be." So it's like either, and so I chose the wife, and we moved and got married, and we lived in Virginia with her family for just a couple of months. And then we heard of a church in Altoona, Pennsylvania, called New Life Worship Center that was looking for a youth pastor. And we got married we'll be married 10 years in October. We got married in October, moved here in March. And then we started what was called the Refuge. And we had like just about 25, 30 kids that were bussed in. So exactly those kids I love to connect with. And dude, it went wild from there over the next 2 to 3 years. We were averaging about 150 to 200 kids, 3 buses, 2 vans, picking up from all over central Pennsylvania. And it was just wild. And that was the real start of like, hey, this is going to be what, like, this is awesome. Because I knew I was created to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know how. And so I knew that God had destined me for youth ministry. And it kicked off with a real bang, man. I'll tell you that. It was amazing.
Yeah, before we get into the refuge discussion there, because I do want to spend some time talking about it, because I think it's fascinating and exciting to see what you guys are doing in Altoona. But, you know, to say that you were destined, or, you know, your sense of call was for that, you know, I've always kind of believed. So I started in Philadelphia, grew up in the city. I mean, I grew up, if anybody knows Philadelphia, I grew up in K&A. That's Kensington.
Oh yeah, I know Kensington. I've been to Kensington a couple of times.
So, you know, it's way different than what it was when I grew up, but it was still a tough neighborhood, and hated it. It was not, but I got my start in youth ministry there, and just really kind of collided and crashed. And I said, I know I feel God calling me to youth ministry, but it's definitely not in the city. It's not with this, and I be careful to say, not with these type of kids.
Yeah.
But I do believe that God has crafted us and given us that ability to connect with students in different places. And so I love the fact that you had that sense of calling to work with the kids that, you know, were smoking pot, playing basketball, you know, the ones that the church traditionally, unfortunately, has kind of turned their nose up to, because those are the bad kids, or those are the rough kids. And I've always appreciated and want to acknowledge the youth workers who just have that heart for those kids. And so I guess I applaud you, but I love that you feel like God has called you to reach those particular students, because I know, as much as I love students, as much as I saw it, it's all good.
Yeah, it's like when you get that froze, you're like,
yeah, it'll happen. That's what it is. We can edit some of it out as we go.
But you're saying you got your start there in Kensington, and you knew that wasn't you.
Yep.
And you know, that's where I got cut off.
Oh, really? That far back?
Yeah.
All right. No, basically what I was saying was, so I knew that I wasn't being called to work with those kids, and I hate to say those kids, but but I love to meet guys and hear how, like your heart was drawn to those students, and those students are drawn to you, because I believe very deeply that God creates us, and in our DNA, He wires us for particular ministry. And I always used to feel in ministry as a younger youth worker, why don't I connect with certain groups of kids? Why can't I, reach out to them and have fruitful ministry? And I've learned over the years that, the reason why we build teams is because I'm not going to reach all of those students. There's no way my personality, my likes and dislikes, just how I'm wired, they're not going to gel with me. I'm not going to gel with them. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because God does wire guys like you who have that ability to connect and draw those kids in. And it's a really cool thing when you can see God moving and working in those folks. So yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, I just want to go back a little further too, and the story behind meeting your dad is a crazy one. We had moved back into Western PA to be part of a church plant, and it was actually your brother Schuler and my son Aiden, who's our third born, who were in class together. And I remember the day that Aiden came home from school and was like, "Hey, Dad, there's this kid in my class. I think he's a Christian. His dad's a pastor, and they have a church not far from here." And like through that kind of a weird thing, and Schuler and Aiden became friends that year. And I think we've been swimming in your grandparents' pool a couple times. And, but I bring that up only because your dad and mom would brag on you and this ministry that you were a part of in Altoona, and the things that you were doing, to the point that you were on the 700 Club at one point.
Yes.
And they were like, "You've got to see this clip and see what he's doing." And I'm making that transition from youth guy to lead pastor because of a church plant, and feeling like this isn't going to work because my heart's with youth ministry. but then they just, so you need to know your parents bragged on you hardcore about the things that God was doing through you in Altoona. So let's talk about that. You've now, you've got a church in Altoona. You said it so quickly that led to Refuge. I know there's more to the story that got you into being a part of the Refuge Network. Just unpack that for us here. Tell us how it got started, kind of what was moving in your heart to actually kind of, because it's not necessarily a church ministry as much as it is an organization that you've started to serve the students in your community. So
what Refuge is today is not what it started as. And if anything, it has progressed in a greater vision and a greater calling. And I believe that. I believe, first of all, for me, when it comes to calling and calls to what you're called to, I believe that God calls you to a region. I believe that there are regional calls that are placed upon our life, even as children's pastors, as youth pastors. I grew up in church culture, so I understand the minimizing of the youth pastor, the children's pastor. Like, that's not like a worthy of like, oh, you're not good enough to be the senior pastor. Oh, you can't speak. Well, no, to be honest with you, the calling and the anointing to do what we do is completely different than that of a lead pastor. But each one of us has a regional call. And so when God called us, my wife and I, to this area, it was a regional call to do something very specific and to do something that really hasn't been done before, which is where we are today. And so when we landed here, we were, just like a lot of us do. What you do is you find other youth pastors in the area, you start connecting, and you start doing all. Yeah, man. You're like, listen, let's build a bridge. Let's start doing stuff. And so New Life Worship Center was right down, was where I was at. It's where Refuge was. For 2 years. We were booming. I was like, man, I need to connect with some people, some other youth pastors. There was a great church called Transformation Church that was right down the road. There's a guy there named Ronnie Ross. He had been there for like 12 years. Dude was a star, knew what he was doing well. And so he and I started doing events together. We did we suffered through the all-nighters together. We did like the winter jams. We did like the picnics together, doing all that stuff, building a great relationship. And then after about a year of that, what happened is he came to me and told me, like, dude, I'm done with youth ministry. Just to let you know, like, I want you to know that I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to phase into something else. But I wanted you to know, because like we've done so much together, and like we've cried over the city, we've prayed over the city, we fought over the city. So he was done. And so naturally, Micah's first thought is, I got a lot of friends that are awesome, that are ballers, that will be great at this church. So like, what if we get them there? And what's interesting is, so the senior pastor of Transformation Church, Pastor Jim Balzano, he's like, hey, I'd love to get together with you and have lunch and talk about what you have done, maybe some ideas and things like that. And so that night I went home, and the Holy Spirit really dropped something in my heart. And it was like, what if you were to youth pastor 2 churches? I'm like, what is that? Like, it was a thought that went through my head. I'm thinking, this is crazy. And so the next day, as I'm leaving to go meet with Pastor Jim, Pastor Wayne, the guy I've been with now for 2 years, says to me, oh, he's just going to ask you to be his youth pastor too, and you're going to youth pastor both churches. And literally, I looked at him, I was like, what'd you just say? Like, I was like, dude, I thought about that last night. And so I go to this lunch meeting with Pastor Jim. We end up having lunch for like 3 hours, just talking, chips and salsa, just going nuts, talking, Never in the conversation do we ever make it to a point of even talking about a youth pastor. Not even. And so he actually texts me and he's like, dude, we missed like what we were talking about. We get lunch in a few days again. And I was like, absolutely. And then again, I went home and I talked to my wife about it. And I was like, I just got this idea. Like, what if ministry could be more than just like one church? What if youth ministry could be pastoring a location, an area, rather than a specific church body? And she was just like, wow, that's wild. That's stretching it. But she's like, keep praying on that. And I couldn't leave. So a few days later, I got lunch together. Pastor Jim straight up asked me, could you be my youth pastor as well? Like, and I didn't even tell this guy what was going on. And Pastor Wayne didn't tell this guy what's going on. So we talk out logistics. The next day, Pastor Wayne, Pastor Jim get together. They talk out logistics, talk about how they could share, how I could be here Tuesday night, here Wednesday night. I rotate every other Sunday to do this. Dude, and then this, man. They go to both their boards. Both boards vote 100% yes. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Like with boards, that stuff is like, there's always that one that says no. Both churches 100% yes, bought into it. So then like we presented it to the churches, both churches took it over. So then I found myself youth pastoring 2 churches, and I'm doing these 2 churches. And it's just going wild, man. We have a group on Tuesday, we have a group on Wednesday, look totally different than one another.
I was just going to say, how did that look with, Tuesday's message was Wednesday's message?
Yeah. Well, like, no, I'm doing 2 different messages because I'm reaching 2 different cultured type of kids. I'm meeting these kids that are like the kids that I have a heart for, the kids that I attract, the kids that I like. A lot of our kids are like, they're kicked out of Young Life. They're kicked out of other churches. We had 8 girls that were pregnant at once in youth ministry. We had a nursery once they had babies for their babies. We had like, it was so unorthodox, everything that we did. Because like we had state troopers coming in all the time, police there all the time, just seeing what's happening, seeing what's going on because they heard about it. So I got that crew on Tuesday, and then I got youth group kids on Wednesday. I got like little Johnny who grew up in the church and his, dad's on the elder board or whatever. And so I had this group, and then what happens is they start mixing together. Because, teens, man, they start like doing life together and they start hanging out together and doing retreats. And then about 2 years later, my friend Keith is in the area, starts a church in Tyrone, which is completely different group of kids from here. Those are your hunters, your fishers. They wear camo all the time. They chew tobacco all the time. Like they're like the country kids, 20 minutes down the road. He asked me to be his youth pastor as well on Sunday nights. I go home, ask my wife. She's like, you have the energy, go do it. So then for those years, I'm youth pastoring 3 different churches, 3 different youth groups. 2 are Assembly of God, one's non-denominational. We're just doing this, and then God's like, you got more. There's more to do. There's more. So I was like, all right, let's start a nonprofit. What is this going to look like? We're helping spiritually. How do we help physically with meeting needs? So we start this nonprofit. I meet my dude Ryan. Ryan becomes our director of operations. He believes in Refuge so much. Volunteers for a year while working a different job, then comes to me and says, I'll raise my own salary to work for Refuge because I believe in it. Dude raises his own salary, becomes director of operations, helps me navigate this. We get 3 more churches on board, different denominations than the ones that we're at. So we have 6 churches that are rocking and rolling. We have a full staff now. There's 5 guys that are on staff that are running this. And we run 3 campuses, looking to launch a 4th campus in 2021 in the next county. But we have become just a regional youth ministry that has broken down the boundaries of denomination, of race, of class. And we are able to offer not just youth group services, but like fishing, hiking and biking, boys club, girls club, basketball club, feeding programs, clothing programs, pretty much anything that we could think of that these kids need, we are able to do that. And we have a whole city that is behind us 100%. And so we became this nonprofit, and the pastors of the churches became our board. They govern us and they lead us. We have a businessman that helps us navigate business decisions, but we just are, the throttle is down, man. And we're just going forward, and we've been the last several years. This is the way it's been. Like I said, I'm going in my 10th year now, 10 years ago that Refuge was started. And I never would have imagined that it would be this, but when God gave me those dreams, they started coming true. And it's always an interesting place to be at when you're walking in the dreams that you've had. And then God gives you bigger dreams. And you're like, what is this? And so Refuge Youth Network was born, and it's networking churches, organizations, businesses, and individuals together for the sake of reaching a generation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to give a little background for our listeners, I mean, other than our paths crossing physically, personally, this past winter at a camp, you came in as a speaker for one of the breakouts.
Yes.
That was this winter, right? That was, It wasn't the fall. It was this winter. So I had spent from 2005 to 2012 in Somerset County, which isn't that far from Altoona.
Yeah.
Actually, I looked at one of your old videos after we kind of touched base at that winter retreat, and you had some videos on your website of some of the things that you guys were doing. I think it was on YouTube, actually, and saw one of my former students that was in my youth group when I was in Somerset, but her family moved away, and I saw her and she was one of those kids that was like on the fringe kids that, my heart went out to them, but I never made that really good connection of, finding a way to get into her world. And none of my leaders were very successful at doing that. And then so to see her pop up on a video and to hear her share part of her story because of what you guys were doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was one of my little 7th graders, 8th graders. Now they're, and I think your video was already a couple years old because they're past college now. I bring that up because I think that you're doing a significant thing in Altoona, but for our listeners who maybe don't know anything about Altoona, PA, describe why Refuge, why it's working. Like, tell me, what were your students like? What's Altoona like? Yeah. And why do you think Refuge is working with your students in Altoona?
So Refuge, the best way I can ever describe Altoona and how Refuge is being productive here is you have to have first an understanding of where you're at. So Altoona is a small town with big city problems. That's the best way that I could do it. The drugs, the alcohol, the addiction. 83% of our kids that are in our youth ministry, we took 100 kids, we pulled them. 83 of them come from a single guardian home, not a single parent home, a single guardian home. The state prison is not far from us. So more than half of our kids, one of their parents are locked up in the state prison. And so you're dealing with a fatherless generation, a generation where drugs and alcohol and addiction is more accessible to them than like you and me going to the store and getting bread and milk. Like that's how accessible this stuff is to them. We also had a very high rate of teen suicide that was happening in central Pennsylvania. And so all of those dynamics where we have families moving from Philadelphia whose parents got incarcerated, we have people moving from Pittsburgh whose parents got incarcerated, and they're all settling in Altoona. Now Altoona is a blue collar town. It's a very hardworking town. The railroad is one of the #1 employers, and then you have the hospital, and then you have Sheetz. Sheetz gas station is they're located here. Home base is here, but then you have a really high unemployment rate too, just because of the culture of living with lower economic situations. So our kids that were reaching, man, they were desperate for something. They needed a safe place. They needed a place that would love them and not be afraid of their problems, but help them work through their problems. And so that's what Refuge is really about. We don't use the term loosely. We use it sincerely when we say that we're a family. We might be dysfunctional, but we're a big family, and that is who we are. And so the teens and the kids in this area, they needed something. Because you could be from Tyrone and be that farmer boy that wore the camo and drove a pickup truck to school, still have the same drug problem as the Hispanic kid that lives down the street, that lives with his grandma whose parents are incarcerated, that's struggling with drugs. Like, so across the board, you have all these different types of kids, but all of them dealing with the same issue. And so for us, it was, how do we take care of an orphan generation? How do we deal with that spirit that's in our city? So we created a safe place for them to be, where they can not only be safe spiritually, but physically as well. And that some of their physical needs of who they were could be taken care of. So that's Altoona, man. Like it could be considered like some people could say it's a scary area. Some people could say that it's not. Some people could, some people drive in and drive out real fast. But it's my city that I love. And it's, it's where it's like, I bleed for this place. Like I love it. And so for those that are listening, this is the type of demographic. I can drive out 5 miles and be in the middle of a field. I can drive 5 miles and be downtown and score any type of pill that I need to. So that kind of gives you the dynamics physically of what this looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important for us to understand, because kind of knowing the area myself from, even, a number of years ago, we still visit Somerset frequently. So like we have connections to that Somerset area, but we've been to Altoona, like we've driven through there. We've been in that area. And so for us to understand what Altoona is looking at as a city, and I'm sure it's no different than, 100 other cities in this country that are dealing with these same problems. But I wanted us to understand Altoona because what you're doing by kind of creating a ministry that's not dependent upon a church, you've now brought churches together with a desire to reach the students of a city, and Refuge is now accomplishing, you've literally become the hands and feet for, I'm going to dare say, probably hundreds of students that have walked through your doors, and you guys have built relationships. So that's an amazing feat. How did it feel? So, my circle of folks is a lot of youth workers who are, we work in a church, and our desire is to reach our communities. But I think a lot of us struggle with, because we work in the church, our reach, I don't want to say it's limited, but we're focused on on who comes on a Sunday morning or a Sunday night or a Wednesday night, but yet our heart still desires to reach more. How have you guys, maybe give an example of something tangible, something that you've actually done to kind of reach those kids? No one opens the door and the kids just flood in. You've had to have done something so that the kids can trust you, so they come. What does that look like for you guys?
Well, Jake, for so long, man, and you'll understand this, for so long, like, we have this weird quagmire that is in youth ministry in the church, where we really do want to reach out to the community and we really want to do more. But then there's that part of us that always see the more as a threat. And we see the community, rather than seeing them as an ally, we see them as a threat. And what we did, man, is God really took me on a journey of biblically understanding the power of community, the power of networking. Jesus himself wept over the city of Jerusalem because of the way that it was. And all throughout scripture, you see where people had concerns for the location physically that they were in. And there was something that spoke to me about that, where it was like, maybe there's more to this than what we think. Maybe the community reach is different than the way we do. And so for me, it's really simple. I'm a creature of habit, man. Like, I go to the same Mexican restaurant. I drink the same coffee shop. I'm a big fan of small business. I'm a big fan of entrepreneurs. I'm a big fan of those people. So what I do is I visit a lot of small businesses. I go to mom and pop restaurants. I go to the small coffee shops. And what ended up happening is, because of building relationship with the community, once a relationship was built as a friend, then when these things came forward with Refuge of wanting to partner, it happened. But again, like, sometimes there's that level of threat. Perfect example is there's a group in our area called Evolution Expressions. They are a phenomenal counseling professional company for teens and kids. And when you would look at them, you would be like, man, well, they don't use the Christian biblical sense of counseling, so we can't use them. Dude, that's the farthest thing from the truth. That's a load of crap. Like that, like, we have missed it, because what we realized in our organization, we had holes. One of our holes was our counseling. It was being able to do that, because I suck at counseling. I'm terrible. You do not want me to counsel you, because I'll ask you, did you pray? Did you read your Bible? And if you tell me no, I'm going to send you out the door. Like, that's how I am. And so for us, what we did is we took a chance and we partnered with Evolution Expressions, knowing that they aren't faith-based, but knowing that they do good work. And because of that, what had happened was they started bringing their clients, they started bringing their kids to our youth events, even our youth group activities. So then we have this whole clientele that we would have never, ever in a million years reached. They start coming to what we're doing because of relationship building. Another perfect example is, the forgotten teens in every city are the juvenile delinquents. The kids that are in juvenile probation, the kids that are locked up in juvie, they're so often the ones that are forgotten about. I built a phenomenal relationship with the juvenile judge in our area, and she started referencing our program as community service hours for those kids.
Oh, nice.
So then what we end up doing is we end up breaking those walls down that is broken in the community, because what we then start doing is when you have to come do service hours at youth group, your life's going to get changed. When you're having to put tables and chairs and set up for games, but then you have to sit through the sermon and you have to sit through the worship, you're going to encounter Jesus. And so we started doing things differently like that, where we did not see our community as a threat, but as an ally. And because of that, we've been able to build relationships with t-shirt companies that do free fundraisers for us. We have CBD places that put up our Refuge Christmas trees, and they do fundraising to help us raise money in the winter.
That's awesome.
We have bars that give us money for our youth camps because they believe in what we do. when you start caring about the community will care about you.
Care about you.
And that's what we have to understand, is that community is not a threat. So for us, it started as a natural relationship with me and business owners. And then it evolved into these friendships and relationships where, like, we have a fitness program that runs 6 weeks, 6 weeks here and 6 weeks there throughout the year. But that gym now gives us, they do free passes for 12 kids to come in, and they will teach them everything from like yoga to kickboxing to powerlifting to CrossFit to whatever it might be. And they do that twice a year for us for free because they believe in what we do and they believe in who we are. And so
that's awesome.
The best thing I can tell youth leaders is don't see your community as a threat, see them as an ally. Do not, don't ever compromise your belief, but trust me that there are good people out there that are willing to partner with you. They might not be Christians, but they're good people and they believe in what you do. So you cannot be afraid to step outside of your circle and get them. And when you partner with counseling companies and juvenile centers and other places and other nonprofits that work with youth and other people that do things, you'll be surprised the relationships and the flow of kids that can come into the program and encounter Jesus just because you are willing to step outside your comfort zone.
Oh, that's amazing. And that's good for us to hear as youth workers, because I don't think many of us think in those terms. Mm-hmm. Let me take you a little deeper with this. Now you've got great community response. How'd you get the kids?
Well, it's really, dude, it's word of mouth. Your number one cheerleader, your number one person that's going to push your youth ministry are your kids. And perfect example, man. So we have a basketball ministry called Above the Rim, and it's boys basketball. We play basketball for about 2 hours, then we eat pizza. And these dudes are rough. Like, they are rough dudes. But I go in and we play and we eat, and then I do a devotional. I do about a 10, 15-minute devotionals. If I can get one of those key influencers to believe in what we're doing and get connected with what we're doing, they bring their friends. And that's what started happening, is that you look for the key influencers in your community that are those leaders. And some of these dudes were not good leaders, but they were leaders. So how do I draw them in? Dude, there's not many guys that are going to pass up a night to go eat. Like, dude, let's go get some wings and pizza. Let me talk to you, man. Let me get to know you. They're going to say yes, and they do that. So the way that our youth ministry was able to grow so fast is because of, again, relationship with these kids, but it's key relationships. It's looking in, and you're not being deceitful, you're being strategic. There's a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
And
so we see that Jesus was strategic.
Yeah.
There's no hiding that.
And what we always miss with Jesus, the passage that we always miss, is that Jesus called the disciples out of the world. They weren't Christians when he called them. They were out of the world. So for us, why can't we use the same model of calling them out of the world and being where we're at, and contacting them in their environment, but then connecting them with Jesus in our environment? And that's really what we have done. But I'll tell you, if you can get the right key students, the key influencers in your area, and they're not always the star athletes, they're not always the head cheerleader or the quarterback. Like, that's not always the leaders. You want those leaders that can get kids to go do crazy things. You want those leaders that can, like, rouse up the football stand. Like, those are the kids that you want to pull in. So for us is we look for key leaders, and then we went after them in our programming. And when we did things like our girls club, when our girls club ran, we instantly saw what girls were wanting to show up early to set up and stay down to tear down things. And those are our leaders. So how do we get to them, and how do we pinpoint them? And I'm the type of guy, like, tell me who the worst student in the school system is, and that's who I'm going to go after, because that's going to be the biggest influencer I can have. And I will tell you, we have had some of the worst kids that have ever attended Altoona High School come through our program, and lives have been drastically changed because of it.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I find the story of the refuge absolutely fascinating. And I think youth workers, I think we can learn a lot from what you guys have done up there, which is why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast here. Yeah. So let's turn the car a little bit here. And one of the conversations I'm having with a lot of guests that have been on the podcast and other youth workers is the impact that COVID has had. So what has that meant to your ministry these couple of weeks? What are some things maybe you've done during COVID? Don't get into what you're planning to do. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But just what's the impact? What has the impact been, and what are some of the things that you've done? Because I know youth workers like me who are in the churches, gosh, we have been scrambling to make things work. So I've got to wonder, what does it look like for you guys during this season?
Yeah, man. Well, I think as a universal to every youth leader and youth pastor, I think every person that's dealt with this says this whole thing sucks. Like, it's just hard and it's been difficult. But I'll tell you this, we can never allow a season like this to not teach us something. And we can never go through seasons of difficulty and hardship and not come out of it better because of what we've learned through it. What it caused us to do, man, we had to scrap all of our plans. We plan a year out in almost everything that we do. We have to. And so for us, we had to scratch everything off the board. Everything went off the whiteboard. It was all gone. And we had to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to be able to navigate this? And so for us, it was getting as creative as we could. How do we still impactfully connect with kids on a social level, but also on a spiritual level? Those were our two things we looked at, social and spiritual. How can we do this? So my team, which are just phenomenal, they came up with originally what was called the quarantine games. And basically it was just like 8 weeks of games that you can play on TikTok, Instagram. And it was us going back. We made some of the dumbest TikTok videos you will ever see in your life, but I promise you'll laugh because it was just, we had to get creative and get outside the box. So we were challenging groups of teens to copy our TikTok video or add on to our TikTok video or play this Instagram game with us, do this with us, do this with that with us. So it caused us to reach into a completely empty bag, look into it and say, how can we put all these pieces together? We have Zoom, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have Snapchat, we have music, we have games, we have all these things. How can we take all of this, throw this into this bag and pull out something that would be useful? And so for essentially the first 2 months of quarantine, it has been the quarantine games have been something that have absolutely thrived for us. Because we're correlating our messages on Sunday night and Wednesday night. So we're doing those two messages on Zoom. So we're doing like an hour of youth group on Zoom, playing games, hanging out, then doing a lesson, praying with kids. And then the very next day they can get interactive with what they learn. We on the Bible app, we started a devotional that all of them follow. So they can all follow devotionals each day that lead up to the correlating message of what we did. And so we just got creative in what we did. And our guys, some of them absolutely did extremely well. Like some of our things really succeeded. Some of them really tanked and bombed big time. But that's youth ministry. Like you will have success and you will have failure. Own them both and move on, because that's what you have to do. And so for us, we had saw a tremendous time I was discouraged just like everyone else when it kicked off. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? But then when you really start getting creative and say, okay, how can I be challenged? I love being able to be challenged by things. And this challenged us more than anything that we faced. But we were able to combat it with things like that. And then we just kicked off and just finished actually today, quarantine Olympics. We went into an Olympic setting where we had a volunteer staff or a staff member from Refuge represent each grade. I was 12th grade, then we had 11th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th grade, went all the way down. And what we were doing is competing against each other to get points for our team. And then the kids had to do actions as well to get points and stuff. What's real cool, Jay, is we've made every single one of these things available to any youth leader, any youth worker for absolutely free. You can donate if you want to, but I know this is usually at the end, but if you go to refugeyouthnetwork.org, you can download quarantine games and quarantine Olympics. Everything is there. Messages, games, videos, templates. We've made it available for every single person. And last time we checked, we had already over 600 downloads on that. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to say that it was effective in what it was supposed to do. In keeping. Now, as we come to this tail end, man, kids are on Zoom burnout. They're tired of Zoom. They're tired of the games. We even did Twitch for a while. We were running Twitch channels and video, but like everyone is getting tired of this. So we have to evaluate for the next week. How do we get back into connecting and keeping what we're doing? But in the quarantine time, man, I want to challenge youth leaders, get creative, think outside the box, use each other. You and I are each other's greatest resource.
Yeah.
Bounce ideas, talk with one another. What has done well? What has failed? I mean, I've talked to so many youth pastors over the weeks trying to get ideas, trying to figure this out, because I know we don't have it all figured out. So, but we got as creative as we could through this season, man.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's why I'm loving having these conversations, because like you, as I was talking with other youth workers, all I kept hearing was frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And, for us, like for me and some of the other youth workers I've talked with, when we first went online, it was exciting. It was new. The games that we were doing, the kids, our numbers were up. We're watching our views and their engagement's good. And then you just slowly watch it go further and further down. And we start scurrying and scrambling. And I talked to one youth worker, and he was like, I am so mentally exhausted from having to spend my entire week creatively coming up with a gimmick or a bit that's going to get that engagement or keep their attention. And then it goes, it airs, and it only produces half of what I hoped for. Yeah. And I've been in that situation.
Totally.
It's been and I feel like for a lot of us, we don't have teams. We don't have other, we're it. We're the middle school guy and the high school guy, and or girl, and we're it. And so, even me, I have a team, but my team's all new and brand new leaders. And so to lean on them, they offer some great ideas, and we incorporate them. But for the most part, coming up with the concept, creating the video, putting it all together, it's exhausting.
Absolutely.
So your resources that we can share, and we can hear, here's what I did, and here's my hope. Honestly, this podcast will air 2 weeks after it's been recorded, just because of other ones I've set up. But I feel like those resources might come at just the right time, because many of us are still looking at another month or 2 months of online ministry before we can even be with our students. So to have some fresh resources come in and be able to turn it up a little bit and do some things different would be awesome. So we will make all that stuff available.
That's why we did it, man. We did it because we knew, hey, listen, there's going to be guys out there that are going to be that like you said, that don't have a team. I've been there. I was there for years. This was just me. I did not have a staff. So I understand the pressure. I understand doing all that and getting all that done. That is why Refuge Resources is available, so that people can have this understanding of man, I might be burnt out and I just don't have it in me to plan this and plan that. Well, guess what? We have something. Take it, make it yours, run with it, have fun, enjoy it. Let us know what was good about it. Let us know what was bad about it. Let's make it even better. And so that is something that we strategically planned, knowing that there were people in mind that were going to need it.
To use that. Yeah, I think timing is great. And I was at the site and I was looking around and I saw those things, and we'll definitely add them to the companion blog that'll go with this episode, and we'll make those links along with some links for you available. Yeah. We have a few minutes left here. I kind of want to turn the car one more time. Summer is here. Restrictions, sanctions, stay-at-homes, all those things are slowly beginning to lift. What are you guys hoping to do within the next couple of weeks as a way of re-engaging your students for the summer?
And that's a big thing, because this is like a new start. This is when you start new with a fresh year. That's exactly what it's going to feel like. And what's hard for us is we always take off the month of August. So August is always the time off for our staff, for our guys.
I do the same thing.
Take a break. So we're literally going to be June, July, boom, and then we're back to August. And so we said, okay, well, how much time do we have, and how can we effectively get close again? How can we effectively be as sincere as possible? And so we're going to be starting back here, and when we do, our first thing back is we got board games, we got snacks. We're just going to hang out. The conversation pieces, guys, how you doing? How'd you deal with COVID? What's going on? What have I missed? How can I help you? How can I assist you? What can I bring? So our first week back at all campuses, all three of them, are simply that. How do we just engage on a personal level to say, man, we missed you, how things, and just kind of hit that restart of relationship button. Hey, because there might be some new kids that even show up because they hear that we're open. And so we just want to be able to start that. And then, we can only plan 2 weeks out, that as of right now, because things constantly are changing.
Right.
We are trying to be as respectful as we can to all the guidelines as well that have been placed upon us, through the government and things like that as they come forward. But the very first thing that we're doing is just making sure our kids are okay. We're not looking to do a polished, perfected sermon or anything like that. Like, no, I'd rather know that the kids are okay. We have kids that have had high anxiety that have been in quarantine. We have kids that have had high level of emotion, and some of them have suffered in depression, all of these things, and they've been locked away at their house for 2 months. So some of these kids we're gonna have to get back and love on even more to make sure that they're okay. But our plan of engagement is intimate. Intentional moments of intimacy. How can we allow those connection points to be as much as possible? We're not looking for flashbang, lights, camera, action. We're looking for moments of knowing that these kids are okay.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think through all of this, I watched some of the different Facebook groups for youth workers, and obviously the Twitters that are coming out. A lot of the things I was hearing, a week or 4 weeks into the Corona thing was that the youth ministry has changed for the rest of history, because we will now always be online. And I'm not buying in on that. And so I had another call with somebody, and like the first thing they're planning is like, we're going to get a ton of pizzas and we're just going to sit around, eat pizza and hang out and talk and reconnect. And I'm like, that's when you push everything else aside, what ministry was, is, and forever will be, at least in my mind, is relationships.
Absolutely.
And what students need to know the most is that they are known. And I think after all of this, our students are going to desire just to want to connect and be reminded that someone knows them, loves them, and is willing to step into their world and engage them where they are, wherever it is that they find themselves. And so, I think youth leaders need to be reminded of that. We're all frustrated with the internet thing. We're tired of Zooms. We're tired of online everything. My hope is that there's a huge resurgence, and let's just get back to the relationships again. So I love the idea of what you guys are doing. Micah, thank you so much for taking some time and sharing this. Again, I am just super impressed with what God has done through you up there in Altoona and the Refuge Network, Youth Network, and so good to hear your story, and hopefully encouraging for us as youth workers to be thinking about what it looks like for us to kind of break down the walls of what traditional youth ministry is in the church setting, and stepping out and seeing our communities. I really love that piece, as our allies and not our enemies. And
absolutely,
I love that a ton. So yeah, hopefully that carries some weight around here. Micah, I'd love to pray for you and for your ministry and for your arm there.
For those of you that don't know, I was wrestling with our staff. That's exactly how that happened. So that's
all for the good of the students.
That's what you get when you think you're still young. So that's what happens.
Yeah, that's why I'm glad I have college kids on my my team here. I'm beyond those years. But let me pray for you and for Refuge and the things that God's doing up there. Absolutely. And that'd be awesome. Let me pray.
Thank you.
God, we give you thanks for Micah and for the incredible heart of ministry that you have put in him. His desire to reach the kids that are a little more difficult, or a little more rough, or for some of us just scare us to death because we don't know how to interact and connect with them. But God, you have given Micah a tremendous passion for those kids. And so pray, Lord, that you would just continue to use him in a mighty way, building relationships, loving on students. I love that he's not just doing the spiritual side of things, but they're looking for ways to meet the physical needs of the students. And so not only do I pray that you would continue to pour into him what he needs, but Lord, that you would continue to grow and support the Refuge Youth Network. And God, that you would provide those partnerships and those resources that would allow them to continue to go out and to reach the students and to provide for them spiritually and physically. Pray for their summer as they look to move forward past Corona and begin to re-engage. I pray for that. There's first connections as they take place next week, God, that you would just make that time on all 3 of their campuses a sweet time for the students to come, to be with the leadership, and to be reminded that they are loved and they are cared for. And ultimately, God, they're reminded of just how much you love them. So pray that you continue to pour out your spirit and your power and your special anointing on that fantastic ministry. And God, I pray that there was something today that was said that has piqued the interest of another youth worker. Lord, they would go back, hear it again, or reach out to Micah to learn what he is doing and what he has done and how you have used him. And we as youth workers would be able to take that, learn from it, and add that to our arsenal of ways that we reach out to our students. So, God, we love you. We give you thanks for this conversation and just pray that you continue to bless Micah and his wife. We pray all of this in Jesus' perfect name. Amen.
Amen.
Seriously, Micah, love it.
Yeah,
great,
I would
great
like to let everyone know if they want to hear, like, if they would like to know more of the story, like in depth. RefugeYouthNetwork.org. You can download. It's called the Refuge Youth Network Manual. It has our whole story. It has a lot of the principles I talked about in depth. It has a whole chapter on community outreach, why it's important, why you should do it, how you should do it. And things like that. So if any of the listeners are looking for something tangible to download, there's a PDF, download it. It's absolutely available for free because people want to know some of the detailed stuff. And it's in there. We just figured, like, when it comes to the finances, to strategy, nuts and bolts type stuff, there are people out there that love that stuff. So we made the document available for them. And if you want to follow us, Instagram, Facebook, we're on that. I'm on all those as well, Micah Marshall. But yeah, thanks for having me, Jay. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no, it's been so good. Glad that we crossed paths and got a chance to talk about what you guys are doing now too, and it's fantastic. And just for our listeners, I'll say this again in the end notes, but we will put all of Micah's contact information along with the information for the Refuge in the companion blog, so you'll have all of the links and you'll be able to go. I may even dig up some of your old 700 Club video and put a link.
Oh man,
put
dude,
a link.
My hair was like, boom.
Put a link there.
I was a little boy, dude. I was a little boy back then.
Yeah, but it just shows how good and faithful God has been in your ministry to see what you guys have done. So
yeah, I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Yeah, it's there. If you see Siri just popped in there. If you see or talk to your parents, tell them we said hey. Aside from that, thanks, Micah. We'll be in touch here after this, okay?
All right, thanks, Jay. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you.
Okay, everyone. Man, what a great conversation we were able to have with Micah. And what a cool story of just how God has taken his passion and his heart for students and has grown a ministry that is impacting hundreds of students' lives. We've included all of his links, as we said in the show. We've included all of his links in our companion blog. So make sure you go over and visit us at theyouthworkerdaily.com. Click on the link for our podcast episode and companion blog with Micah. And you'll get all of his contact information along with some of the resources that he shared, some of the things that they've created to do and to use over there in Altoona. We hope you find those things helpful for you and your ministry. All right, that's going to about do it for us on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening, or watching. Again, we want to encourage you. Conversation with Everyday Youth Workers is about everyday youth workers. So if you would like to be a guest, we would love to hear your story of what God is doing in, through, and with your ministry to students. Simply DM us. You can follow us on social media at YTH Worker Daily. You can reach out through any of those platforms, or just look us up at the website, theyouthworkerdaily.com, and click on the link for, hey, I want to be a guest for the Conversation Here podcast. And we'd love to reach out to you and hear your story and get you to be a guest. So go ahead and do that. And as always, guys, if you're listening on iTunes, be sure to rate us and subscribe. you doing that will help us grow this audience, and we'll continue making great episodes like the one we had today. All right, and with that, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next Thursday with another episode here of Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers. Until then, thanks for being a part of the Youth Worker Daily.